Welcome back. The NPA has reopened inquests into the deaths of the late ANC leader, Chief Albert Luthuli, and anti-apartheid activist Griffiths Mxenge. Luthuli died after being hit by a cargo train in 1976. An inquest held in the same year cleared South African railway workers of any wrongdoing. Mxenge was then murdered at Umlazi near Durban in 1981. Joining us is Jos Venter, an associate at Wentzel law firm. Jos, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this afternoon. What would prompt the reopening of such cases, especially 30 years on after apartheid ended? And what significance do these cases have in the South African context today?
Good afternoon, Katlego. Thanks for having me. These reopened inquests are usually sparked by new facts that come to light since the passing of the activists. Some of these facts could be new understandings of what we had, new understandings of how the police operated during apartheid, and things like that. But it's also part of the prosecuting authorities' broader policy and work towards, looking into apartheid murders and police killings during apartheid. And it's significant at this point in time, because for a very long period after the completion of the TRC, post-TRC cases never progressed and were never prosecuted or investigated by the police and the prosecuting authority. So it's part of the process of closing that chapter in our history, and that makes it significant at this point in time.
So you mentioned that, what would then prompt is the emergence of new information. So maybe just speak to us about the legal framework and just elaborate on the legal mechanisms that would then be available to the NPA for prosecuting such crimes. How do these mechanisms differ from your contemporary crimes on a day-to-day basis?
So the reopened inquests operate within the scope of the Inquests Act. So there, an inquiry looks into the death and the purpose for the death and tries to find out who could be held responsible. And if there is a recommendation that there could be persons to be prosecuted based on the findings of the inquest, then a prosecution follows from that. So the inquests are sort of a precursor to a potential prosecution. It's not a given that a prosecution would follow after an inquest. So the inquest is merely to determine what happened and who could be held responsible.
You spoke about the TRC. Do you think it was successful in just promoting justice, or was it more about reconciliation and the emphasis of forgiveness and amnesty?
I think there's a lot of differing views about the success of the TRC. To me personally, I do think that the TRC had its successes. But the TRC as well was just a process on its own that had to be followed by a further process that the government was responsible for, and that's our democratic government. So the TRC made a recommendation that where amnesty wasn't granted for certain crimes and perpetrators, or where amnesty wasn't sought, then those crimes should be prosecuted boldly by the authorities under the democratic government. So in that way, or in that sense, there was a deep failure by the democratic government and the democratic authorities to hold true to the promise of the TRC.
You do speak of certain successes that you could see out of the TRC, but what alternatives do you think exist in order to uncover the truth and just ensure accountability when we do have those commissions and they fail to deliver the results that are intended?
It's all about political will. It's whether or not there is a political will by the government of the day to follow on the recommendations of whatever commission of inquiry might have been, whether it was the TRC or, for example, most recently, the State Capture Commission. If there is a real desire on the part of the government to hold those accountable for the crimes that were committed or for whatever happened, that the Commission of Inquiry investigated.
And how do you think prosecuting apartheid-era crimes contributes towards the healing and reconciliation of South Africans?
There is a rhetoric that's going around at this point in time that we should leave our past behind us. We're 31 years, almost 31 years into democracy. But I do think because of the failure to look into these crimes and to hold those accountable, I don't think that's a rhetoric we could uphold at this point in time. There are many unanswered questions, many victims, many survivors who don't have closure, who don't know the truth, who are still waiting for justice. So until we have secure justice for hopefully all of them, or at least most of them, then we can move beyond or move to a point where we can say that it's time to put our past beyond us. But there are just too many victims, too many survivors who have been failed, who do not know what happened to their loved ones, and who have not seen any accountability for the violations that they've suffered so brutally under apartheid.
And what would that justice look like, Jos?
Justice at this moment could be truth, and that truth comes out of inquests, but it could also be punitive justice, where there are perpetrators of crimes who could be held criminally liable. And there it's the responsibility of the state to investigate and to prosecute. So it depends on case by case. If there's no perpetrators left, then justice would take the form of truth. And that's certainly something that we should try as hard as possible to give to families. But where there are people still alive and perpetrators still alive who can be held criminally liable, then they should be held liable for the crimes that they committed during apartheid.
And do you think this would prompt the reopening of other apartheid-era cases?
We hope so. There's been a hard drive from families of victims and from survivors themselves to have their cases looked into. That responsibility falls solely on the SAPS and the National Prosecuting Authority. They are constitutionally and legally obliged to look into or to investigate and prosecute crimes. So we hope that the current processes that the NPA have in place, where they are looking into these cases, can be speedily concluded, so that these matters can come before courts before we are at a point in time where there's absolutely nothing left to do about the crimes that were committed.
Well, Jos, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Certainly those families looking for nothing but the truth to come out of these inquests.